Righto. Well, is this where we learn how to fish? Is this, did I come to get some fishing tips? Yeah?
You come to the wrong group, mate.
Not this one. All right, I'll go and check another one.
We've all got a flat battery.
So how are we all? Good?
Yeah, good.
Who have we got? We got little heads on the screens there.
Yeah.
Righto, do you want me to start? Or have you got people waiting?
Well, let me introduce you, Jason. I met a few years ago, and he's been in the world of batteries forever. And whenever I have issues, I go to Jason, and he sorts them out. So we were talking the other day about something, and I just thought then it'd be, I rang about lithium batteries after Mike and I talked about them. So we got onto that, and I said, would you like to do a presentation to us on batteries? So here he is. So Jason, over to you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me along. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Beautiful. Yes. All right. Well, the first thing I think, probably understanding batteries, is to go back to the basics and, have a chemistry lesson about acid. No, we won't do that. I'd like to explain batteries to you in a way that I've sort of developed over the years that makes it a little bit more understandable about what you're up against and what you're trying to. If you can understand this principle, your battery, future will be pretty good. So batteries are made out of lead and acid predominantly. You've got new battery types like the lithium, and there's carbide, and there's all these new batteries, but the overwhelming majority of batteries probably around your house and in your car are lead and acid batteries. A few different types: lead, flooded, there's AGM and gel. They all contain lead and they all contain acid, just a different way of doing it. So, the thing you need to understand about a battery is...
If you want to see everybody else, press the gallery.
They work on...
Somebody...
Oh, you're right?
All right. Yeah, go on. I had to mute somebody. He's got his radio on.
Batteries work on PFM, pure friggin' magic. I mean, there's basically a box, and inside mysterious things happen. So I hope to demystify that a little bit for you. If I take a sinker, you guys should be familiar with a sinker, and if I scratch the bugger, give it a good scratch there, it'll go real shiny. Yeah, so that lead inside is nice and shiny, but within a day, that will have gone dark grey again. So lead self-heals. Lead is a self-healing metal. There's probably two common metals that do it: your wedding ring, gold, and lead. They both try and protect themselves from the outside environment, from oxidising. So a battery's got lead in it. It's got acid in it, and it's the interaction between the acid and the lead that creates the chemical reaction that creates electricity to flow inside the battery. So a fully charged battery is full of acid in the solution. If you took a car battery and you tipped that solution out, when that battery was full, it'd be really, really, really acidic. When it's flat, very low in acid. I mean, I wouldn't recommend you drink it, but geez, if you were desperate, you'd flatten it right down to nothing, and you wouldn't drink it, but that's the least amount of acid in the battery. So what happens between full and empty is the acid leaves the solution inside, and it starts moving over onto the lead, and it sits up on the lead. Now, lead, as we know, self-protects. The acid is now sitting on the lead. It starts to attack the lead. The longer I leave the acid sit on the surface of the lead, the more it sort of tries to repel that. And if I leave it there too long, it can create what we call sulfation. I like to think of sulfation as a bit of a scab. If you cut yourself, it forms a hard crust. The next time you go to charge and discharge, there's a crust there, and it can't penetrate into the lead, so you have less reaction. So basically, the acid moves over onto the lead, and then when we charge it, it pushes it away. So if you've got a full battery, if my battery's full and I drop it to half, I've moved about half the acid in the battery over onto the lead. The lower I drop that battery, the more acid is sitting on that lead, and the longer I leave that battery low, the more damage I do to the lead. So that's an important point. If you've been out, for a fish, and you've used your trolling motors, and you come back and you think, oh, they'll be right, I'll leave them for a couple of days, I'll put them on charge. You've left them batteries low. All that acid is now creating a little crust So the next time you go to charge and discharge, your battery's capacity is a bit lower because you've now sulfated the plate. Eventually, your battery gets to a point where that acid has attacked the surface for so long and so much that it degrades, and you just don't. You can put it on charge for hours and it'll run for a few minutes. You'll often hear guys will say, "Oh, I've had that battery in my car for 14 years, you know, it's older than I am." Well, that can happen, but they might have only just taken a little bit out of the battery. Sorry, someone got a question?
No, you're just getting a bit of feedback when people join in. Fergus just joined up.
No worries. If anybody has a question, feel free to unmute at any point, I guess, and fire away, or we can ask questions at the end. So that's a basic little, if you can keep that in your mind about how that battery interacts with the acid and the lead, that'll go a long way for you about how far do I discharge my batteries. A lot of people ask me, how far should I discharge a battery and what do you consider to be a reasonable level? Lithium batteries have got a little battery monitoring system built into them. Lithium cells, I have one here. If you open up a lithium battery, it'll look like a bunch of them, like a big AA really. It's a whole bunch of them joined up with little metal tabs in all together. So if you take a lithium battery that looks like an AGM apart, it'll be full of them. And on top of that sits a little management package. Lithium doesn't like to be discharged below about 10 volts these days. The old one's a bit lower. So we have to have a battery management system, or BMS, that sits on top of these batteries and constantly looks at them. Each one of these cells, I got 2 kids and one was a food pig and the other couldn't give a bugger about food. Each of these little kids is a bit the same. Now I got heaps of them in a battery pack. Lithium takes charge really quick, so that BMS has got to make sure that one's not being greedier than the other, because if you let it get too much, it'll take everything, get a bit hot, and that's a problem. So that battery management system's there to control that charge and discharge and to control you from overly discharging the battery. Our traditional batteries, we don't have that BMS. That's got to be this big mug here, yeah? So what we've got to do is look at the battery and understand what its capabilities are. Now, a brand new battery is a bit different to a battery that's 5 years old. It's different to a battery that's 10 years old. As the battery ages, that sulfate's building up and we're reducing that capacity. So a brand new battery, you can get half out of it, but an old battery, you might get down to about quarter before you're sort of losing your capacity in that battery. So it's important to look at the voltage, become very familiar with battery voltages and have an understanding of what your battery's needs are. 99% of batteries, and you'll get this argued, the greats will argue this, some will say 10.5 volts, some will say 10.8 volts, some will say 11.8, 11.5. I personally think about 11.8. I've spent a lot of time reading a lot of manufacturers' user manuals and data sheets, and overwhelmingly they say about 11.8. I personally set my fridge to 11.5 because it doesn't have 11.8, and I'm happy with that because I know I don't often let it go to that. And if I do, I get it back quickly, so I'll run the car and let it run for a little while to let it top back up a bit. So obviously, one of the simplest way to check a battery's voltage is with a multimeter. Yeah, now not always easy or convenient to have that on you, especially when you're fishing. What Tim has just recently discovered is a little product that actually Ozcharge, the sign over my shoulder here, sell. There's a variety of these. You can buy them. You buy them at Battery Wells, you buy them at battery shops. It's basically a little box and it sits on the positive and negative side, and you can connect your mobile phone to this. It'll give you alerts on when the battery's at a certain level. It'll log and graph each minute of each day that the battery's running. So, for example, you might have it on a trolling motor. You can put these on each. A 12 volt, if you got a 24 volt system, I always recommend putting it on both, because each of those batteries may over time, charge and discharge at a different rate. Yeah, and I'll come to trolling motors and 24 volt in a minute, but that's a really, they cost about $79 retail. You'll get them on eBay and the internet cheaper than that, but that's a really simple, really great way of just monitoring your battery voltage.
I can just add to that, Jason, since I put them on everything I've got 9 of them on, that I was shocked at the difference in them. You know, my tractor battery was down at 10.8 or something like that.
Yeah.
In my big boat that I haven't looked at those for a while, one of those, and I'll actually show you, but when you go along, it was complete. One battery was completely stuffed. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So that would have saved a trip out. But anyway, I'll find it and show you.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see it. Just keep in mind...
Jason?
Sorry, say again?
Yeah, Jason, it's Mike.
How are you, Mike?
Good, mate. Measuring the voltage,
Yes.
Load or no load when you measure the voltage?
I always like to measure voltage with no load. It really depends on the load. If I'm running a little tiny LED light somewhere, I know that it's going to be like 0.1 or 0.2 of an amp. It's really not a big... I'll measure the voltage. But if I've got a fridge running 5 or 6 amps or something like that, I'll always measure that battery. The other thing is to remember resting voltage. So if I've just been trolling for 10 minutes on my 30 amp draw trolling motor, and then all of a sudden I just check the voltage after I turn it off, that's no good either, because the battery's been under load and it just needs to settle a bit. They call it a resting voltage. If I ever use a battery charger to charge a battery, I'll wait for about an hour after I've had it on charge, and I'll just see where that resting voltage settles. As soon as you turn a charger off, you'll see the voltage drop back down to that battery's resting voltage. That's where I measure it. A good AGM, you get anywhere between 13.3, 13.4. I've seen them as high as 13.6, but that's rare. An old one, anything below 13. Even crank batteries, crank batteries can be anywhere from 12.4 is a bit low, 12.6, 12.7 is happy. So just the different battery types, slight different battery voltage, but understanding that voltage is really important. Understanding that when you've got a 30 amp load on a battery, the voltage will drop right down, and that's not necessarily the battery's voltage, it's just the load has caused the voltage to drop. As soon as you take the load off, the voltage will come back up.
Jason, could I ask you a question?
Yeah, for sure.
So I've got a Seamaster boat battery, the starter battery.
Yeah.
On a fairly recent boat. Anyway, when I charge, it gets up to 12.7, 12.8, thereabouts.
Yeah.
And very quickly drops to about 12.5, and then within a week or two, without any load at all,
yeah, would
drop to about 12.4.
Yeah.
If I look at one of those tables that show you what each percentage is.
Yeah.
So 12.4, I think, for sealed lead acid battery, about 75%.
Yeah. It's
And
probably about right.
I worry about that. I've got those monitors on all my batteries as well, and all the other batteries, AGM batteries, stay at 12.78.
Yeah.
This one goes to 12.4.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that something I should be concerned about or not?
Look, so that start battery is obviously charged from the boat motor.
I also charge it straight away. As soon as I come home, I would charge it with a normal charger, about 30 amp charger as well.
Okay, so, all right. So that battery sounds like it's sulfated. It does sound like that sulfation, it's got a little bit of cross there, that it might have been a bit low at some point and it's allowed to sit and then it's formed. If it hasn't, I'd be having a look at, batteries can get what we call a surface charge in them. So the lead sort of hasn't had a chance to soak. So what I typically do with that is try and run it down to about 12 volts.
Okay.
Yeah, like run it right down to about 12 volts or even 11.8, okay. and then put a decent switch mode charger on it. So I hold these two up. Yeah, big difference between an RLEG.
I've got a high quality charger.
Yep.
I think it's rated at 20 amps. It's got 7 steps and all that kind of stuff.
Beautiful.
but I never let it go below 50%, even 75%.
Yes.
So I was too worried about letting it go below that. So you reckon it's actually okay to do that once or twice?
Yeah. As long as you don't drop it down and then leave it for hours and hours, just as long as within, an hour of dropping it down, you put it back on charge.
Doesn't damage the
You're
battery.
not going to kill it that quickly. If you leave it overnight, you'll start to do damage, but not that quickly.
Tim, one thing, have you disconnected that battery with nothing on it? And
Yes, I have, yeah.
Yeah, that was the
I've
next one.
taken it off the boat just to make sure that there is nothing else. I mean, it's got a switch. I turn it off anyway.
Yeah.
And I've checked all the leakages and all that kind of stuff, but just to make sure I actually pulled it off. I charge it within a couple of days, it goes down to 12.5.
The one other thing I would say with batteries is that every now and then it pays to give them what we call an equalisation charge. So that equalisation charge, I'm still, I'll be honest, I'm still a student of batteries. I'm still learning all the time. But I'll use a little clear battery to explain this. But this is just a small AGM style battery, but it's clear.
Yeah.
So you can see that within the battery there's 6 sections.
Yeah.
So this is a 12 volt battery. Each one of these cells represents 2.4 volts. Okay, then they link them all the tops, and it's very hard to see on this, but at the top you've got little tiny bars at the top of each cell, and then they link them all together to make a battery. It's possible for one of those little packs to get a bit lower in voltage than the others. So what we do is we do an equalisation charge that pushes the voltage quite high. You'd probably on a flooded battery. Is it a flooded battery?
Yeah.
That you top up with water?
It's a marine battery. I'm not exactly sure how that is classified. I think it's somewhere in between, isn't it?
I mean, it always pays to have a look at the little data sheet that you can download off the net for that battery. But I'd say somewhere about 15.1 volts. You might find your 7-stage charger has a little equalisation mode.
It does that, yeah.
Then run it down to 12 volts and give it that equalisation mode. What that'll do is that the other thing that happens inside a battery that people don't realise, remember as I was an apprentice, the boss always used to say, never ever fill a flat battery. And I thought, why? I didn't really realise. But what happens is between charge and discharge, the water in the battery, even the water in the separator in AGMs, moves into the lead. So it's actually absorbed into the lead. So you fill the battery up and then it pushes the water back out of the lead and it overflows the battery. So just keeping that in mind, I like to give that equalisation charge what I call a recombination. It sort of sweats the battery and gives it a good long stir. And that can help balance those plates out. So
Jason.
Hello.
It's Mike. Is that the same as the recondition mode on the charger?
Yes and no. Some chargers call a recondition mode an equalise, and some call it the recondition mode is usually a pulse charge. So what that does is I had to talk to the guys at CTEC in Sweden, and I had to talk to the guys from Keypower in Denmark on this, and they both told me that what they're trying to do when the lead gets that scab on it with a really high voltage and amperage burst, little hitting the plate, they're trying to flex the plate to create little pathways to get acid in, to get the reaction happening and try and pull a bit of that sulfate off. It doesn't always work, but sometimes you'll find it can make a big difference to a battery. It's just one of those. Sometimes I don't know if it's a sales pitch. I've had it work on batteries here, but never ever has it reconditioned a battery back to its former glory. I always say once they're sulfated, they're sulfated. So just important to try and keep that voltage. The other thing I'd mention...
just a quick one.
Yes?
What was that device called, the measuring one that Tim put on all his batteries? What are they called?
That's called an Auscharge BM12.
The battery monitor, yeah.
Yeah, BM-12.
I've sent the link to everybody at some stage. I might do that again.
Yeah, beautiful. They're just a very easy little device.
I'll just show you, Alan. On my four-wheel drive, I've got a fridge hooked up, and this is what's really interesting with the thing. if you can see that, does that come up?
Hold it down a bit, Tim. Down to where your body is. No. All we can see is your campfire.
What about now?
No, a bit higher.
Tim, you need to take off your background.
Yeah.
You need to turn your background off. Otherwise, you'll just get this pixelization all the time.
Now we're going to see.
So you're saying have none.
There you go.
Okay. Yep.
That one.
Yep.
Oh, what about it? But anyway, I will get it. But the thing about it is that it just tells you so much about your bloody batteries. That one there, does that show? Well, there you go.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, you can see all the little dips every time that 12-volt battery in my ute cycled. It turned on and off, and then at night it's obviously slower. You can see then when I turn the vehicle on, you can see where I turned the solar on. So it's extraordinary. It tells you all sorts of things. It doesn't have an amp meter in it, which you can buy them, but they're a hell of a lot more expensive.
The other thing it does, Tim, actually, is that it also does a cranking test, whether it's the cranking, if on the software, there's another tab for cranking.
Yeah.
Well, it won't do that on these on your solar on your alternate battery, but it will.
Yeah.
But this is the one, that battery there in my big boat. That was the one Jason was telling me about. You know, as soon as I put it on, that's what it looked like.
Yeah.
And obviously, it took no charge. It's completely buggered.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'd recommend those. Tim Killick, he got them on eBay. Jason's got these other ones. They're all about the same price.
I really love these. These are a fantastic little device. You can buy these from JCar. They're basically a little volt amp meter.
Jason, just before you go to that, go back one. If you, in the old days, you'd get a battery and you'd take the top off it and you'd look in it to see if it had any water in it.
Yep.
And if it didn't, you'd fill it up with deionised water.
Yep.
We've all, I don't know about everybody else, but I've been buying water they put in irons,
Yep.
ironing clothes because it's deionised water.
Yep.
But obviously a lot of batteries, you don't do that anymore, like gel batteries and things.
No.
But given you did have a battery to add water to it, I heard you say a minute ago, don't add it if it's flat and you're recharging. So when do you put it back in?
When it's full and after an hour and it's settled.
Okay.
And then I like to give it a bit more of a charge and just help it stir around a little bit.
I know there are many batteries now that you actually have to add water to. Are they all sealed?
Mostly 99% of batteries that need water in them are flooded crank batteries. There's a couple of brands and why I like them. I buy Amaron batteries for all my crank batteries because they're a calcium battery that you can add water to. 90% of the calcium batteries on the market are what we call maintenance free, which is basically just a big scam for the world to make sure you buy a battery every 5 years. I mean, it's a flooded battery that you can't top up is what a maintenance free battery is. So, that just ensures that the battery will die and you come back for more lead. So I like to buy the Amarons. They're built in India. They can handle very high heat and the really rugged conditions of Australia. And I just have no problems with it. Amazing. But, usually flooded batteries, Tim.
Thank you.
So the topic of voltage and amperage is probably one that I just touch on. It's very important to measure if you're running a trolling motor or if you're camping and you've got a lot of load, it's always good to see the amperage as well as the voltage, or at least have an understanding of what amperage your items draw. I mean, if I've got a battery that's down at 12.2 volts and I'm pulling 10 amps off it, I probably need to turn some stuff off. If I've got a battery at 13.1 and I'm pulling 10 amps off it, I couldn't give a bugger. So amperage is a bit like litres per minute, whereas the voltage is more like the fuel gauge, how much fuel I've got left in the battery. So just always keep that in mind. As I was saying, these are good. These have got a little digital log. You can log the amperage, the volts, how long, how much amperage has gone in. I find these when I'm camping great. I use a fold-out solar panel and it tells me what I've put back in for the day, and they're about $49 at JCar as well. So they're a good little device. So now, has anybody got any specific questions or needs, or thought, I'd really like to come away today and know more about this?
I did send you the list of questions that everybody asked.
You did? The questions? Sorry.
I did, but I'll find them.
You're right, recap me. So battery wise, the other thing is, what is good is these you can buy from a company called BainTech. You can get them on the internet as well. It's called a low voltage disconnect. So it's basically got two terminals on the bottom. You run a power wire into this and then the power wire out. And internally, you can actually pop the top off and a little dip switch set different voltages. And I use these on my three-way fridges in my caravans. I run them on lots of stuff so that if I am, the grey hair, I start forgetting and things run down. Once they get to a certain point, they turn off and my battery's protected. So that's also just a good little thing to keep in mind.
Jason,
Hello.
just on that, I've actually fitted something like that to my boat.
Yes.
On the boat battery,
Yep.
so that I don't have no cranking power.
Yep.
What voltage would you set it at?
That is now. There's
Because
somebody.
the battery drives the sounder.
Yep.
And basically drives the sounder the lights, the bilge pump, and the cranking motor.
Does it do the crank?
Yes.
Then I probably would try and. That's a very tricky one because when you do your crank, it's really going to pull your voltage down. So you really need to sort of do a bit of a test with a voltmeter, do a couple of cranks and see how low that voltage point gets to, and then add, a few more volts to it, because as that battery gets a bit older and as you've got your radio running, your sounder running, this running, the phone charger plugged in, and then you crank, you're going to hit that and it's going to disconnect.
Okay.
So I would put a voltmeter on, give it a crank, find out where that bottom point is. So my battery, when it's healthy, pulls down to about 9 volts. Because that is a very difficult one on a crank battery. I only ever, to be honest, put these on start batteries. Or leave the crank battery where it is and just have all your accessories run off of this. So what I'd call your non-essential accessories, like your phone charger, I'd leave your Navionics and your radio on it, because if you get into an emergency, you don't care what voltage the battery is. I want my radio to work. Yeah, so you could leave your crank and your radio on the battery, and who cares if it dies. And anything that you're likely to maybe, like if you plug a light in, run that circuit through the low voltage disconnect. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes
So
sense.
just split your circuits.
Yep.
I can add something to that. I have purchased one of those. I didn't realise that it does not allow you to set the voltage. It comes with a preset number. So if you're going to get one that you can change.
Yep.
Otherwise, you end up stuck with something that you don't necessarily want.
So the BainTech one, you stick a screwdriver in the sides here, and you pop it. You watch. This will make a liar of me today. But you basically pop, with the BainTech one, you screwdriver, pop it out, and inside there's little dip switches that allow you to set different voltage points. And there's instructions with the manual on that one. These are a bit big and clunky. There are other types around that have got, that's a Connexus one, it's got a little voltmeter in it, and it's got a couple of options, off, 10.5 or 11.5. So that's not a bad little option as well. So there's different types available. I like that one because you can see you got a little voltmeter as well. So it just depends. Lots of options. So is everybody cool on how to parallel batteries and series batteries to make series makes 24 volt, parallel 12 volt? Yeah, okay, beautiful.
I mean, you can't, I asked you before we started, if you've got a lithium and a gel battery, you can't series those.
No, you only ever parallel or series two similar battery types.
Yep. And
very much the case, same size. I would never put a 50 amp and 100 amp together. That's just asking for trouble. So the thing I learnt when I worked for a battery manufacturer that I hadn't really given the weight that I should have is cables. Absolutely. If you have a look on 12 volt shed, I think there's a section on cables, or I'm at least doing one. But cabling's very, very important. The length of your positive and negative cable from the charger needs to be exactly the same length and same type. I've seen guys use, you know, some of the most horrendous stuff. Out of my own vehicle, when I bought my Prado, I found this abomination.
Drop it down a bit.
What is it?
So, sorry, can you guys see that?
Can now, but I don't know what it is.
So that's a bundle of wire that was just the most, it's hideous. That it used to get warm when there was current flowing through it. There was one wire in with 2 wires out. Yeah. The other thing is to regularly check your crimps. I mean, that one's a beauty. That's a crimp that I pulled off a vehicle recently, and it still fits perfectly back in. And that's an earth. They didn't have big enough wire, so they joined 3 together to make 1. So you got to remember that inside this battery, that little pathway, the electrons are going to flow through each cell, and each cell is going to try and receive the same amount of charge and discharge. When I start joining one long cable and one short cable, now the path for electrons is now different, and you have a different resistance on the in and out. So just something to keep in mind. It will dramatically increase the life of a battery, the right cabling. So cabling and lugs, I don't know about crimping, soldering. I mean, it's an age-old thing. In marine applications, I actually like to do both. I like to solder and crimp. I find that, you know, bang, 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 bang of the waves over time can actually, the solder can, you know, not be the greatest. So I find the solder with the crimp ensures that I get never any dramas. But yeah, crimping's, you know, again, crimping tools, there's different lugs, different all that sort of stuff. Dual batteries, has anybody got a DC to DC charger on the boat?
Yeah, none on the boat, but on the car I do.
Yeah, okay. Again,
So you could, I was going to ask you that one. We've pretty much all of us have got second batteries in our cars.
Yep.
And DC chargers, and there's 1,000 conversations about it.
Yep.
So you might run through that, and also you might run through, if you've got another vehicle, like I know Chris tows a caravan, and he's probably got a DC charger in that.
Yep.
And how you set up to do that.
Yeah, okay. So I could honestly, I've got a 4-part video set that I'm in the middle of filming on dual battery systems and the different battery types, and so I'm not going to go crazy today because I'd bore the piss out of everybody. But what I would say is that little magic box, there's just a few do's, don'ts, make sures. I always I don't use chassis earths for dual battery systems. I hate chassis earths. Some people love them. I don't. I always run my cables back to my batteries and run 2 cables. Run good quality cable. Anything at the back of a vehicle, an Anderson plug, should run nothing more than 18 mil squared. I like 21 mil squared. Now, I'm not going to say 8 BNS or 3 BNS or 6 BNS because the outside diameter of the cable, China love doing double insulated to make it look like a bigger cable, but the 16 mil squared is the number of strands inside that cable. You got to remember the electrons flow around the outside of the copper, so the more pathways you can create, the better. Any young fellas like me or old boys who's been into drag racing will know that the first thing you stole was your dad's welding lead, because when you put the battery in the boot of the HQ, you needed to get that resistance down. You used the welding lead because it had millions of little screens, and that would crank the Chevy over. Nothing else would. It'd be, yeah, but the welding wire, vroom, she'd start. So that's the key, is good quality wire. Anderson plugs, I hate them, but I love them. They're just always keep an eye on them. I actually use a little gas burner you can buy from Jayco to solder my lugs in so that I can easily pick them out, give them a heat, pull the wire out, chuck them in the bin, throw another one in, replace them. Rather than crimping them, because once you crimp them, you bugger them. So if you just heat them, push the lug on, give them a heat up, drop solder in it, push it on, beautiful. But they need to be checked regularly. I've seen bits of Milo tin, bits of bark stuck in them. I've seen all sorts of shit over the years. They're horrible things, but dual battery system, Doesn't matter what type you got, whether it's an Innovolt like this or whether it's a Red Arc or whatever type you've got, always try and fit this as close as you can to the second battery. If you've got one in the truck and one in the caravan, the one in the caravan should come off the start battery. The one in the truck should come off the start battery. You don't run the one in the truck to the boot, run a cable down to the van. So now we go start battery, DC to DC, then the van. We always go back to the start battery for that second battery. Okay, so that's one big tip. So good earths as close as you can. This little device, its primary role is to pick the voltage back up to where it needs to be. The start battery on modern vehicles, ranges I've seen at 12 volts after about 2 minutes off the key. They'll drop their voltage quite low. With emissions laws and all the bullshit, they're trying to unload that alternator, so I've seen them drop quite low. So that's got to pick that 12 volts up and get it back to 14.7 for an AGM or 14.3 for a gel or whatever your lithium setting is, 14.2, 14.5. Yeah, so its job is to pick the voltage up. And when it's at the back of the car, it starts here, slowly drops down. It's got to pick it back up and feed it into the battery. So its job is to compensate for voltage drop. It's there to sit between the two batteries and keep an eye on them and disconnect and connect so that we can have a usable experience. We don't want the fridge running this down and the start battery down. So when your key's off, it'll watch both, run off both, stop, and then this one will continue to run the battery down. So yeah, in terms of brands, I probably lean towards Innovolt and Red Arc. They're probably the two that I like personally. I've played with lots. I've trialled lots. They're just two that I particularly like certain features about. One thing, there's a couple of things for those that tow vans with three-way fridges. And anybody who does pig shooting runs or long trips. There's probably the one fundamental thing that I educate every human I can about these. If you've got a wall charger, so if I put this battery on my charger and I plug it in and I put 25 amps into it, it's going to get a bit warm. It might take about, I know if I drop it to 12 volts, it might take 6 to 8 hours to fill back up. I've taken, 50, 60 amps out of it. I'll run a 20 amp charger for 6 hours. Well, how's that work? Well, obviously it puts a lot in to start, slows it down. So a DC to DC charger, once that's full, so if I leave home with a full battery and I've got a DC to DC charger on it, if I'm running 2 fridges off this battery and I'm pulling 15 amps, this will flow through this battery to those fridges and it will do it for as long as I drive. So I could potentially cook this battery by constantly putting charge and discharge in this battery for that whole drive. So anybody with a three-way fridge, I always run a second Anderson plug to the rear to run the three-way fridge from the vehicle start battery and not off the dual battery. That's just a tip for new players.
Well, the other thing there, Jason, is that if you run it off, as we did before you told me about that, if you run it off that second battery, that it ends up robbing that second battery.
Correct. It does indeed. And then you end up, you can arrive with all sorts of situations. So, and keep in mind, its job is to sit and look at both batteries and see which one needs to be disconnected. You're effectively trying to parallel 3 batteries through DC to DC charges as well, not 2. So when you connect to the start battery, you're making a parallel connection. Now you're adding a third one in, and you've got all these different cable lengths, and it just creates a nightmare for those electrons. So by paralleling with the start batteries, always you're getting a direct feed from the alternator. You just get a far better result. So
you were going to talk about battery chargers, and then you got waylaid on something else.
Righto, so bulk, absorption, float are the 3 main chargers. I know the gentleman there mentioned that he had a 7-stage charger. This is an 8-stage charger. The old Arlec from the shed. I think we all had one of these, the wheel chockers I used to call them. Yeah, come on, everybody had one of these.
I've still got it.
Keep it. So, these are called a switch mode charger, a smart charger. Sometimes they're a little bit too smart for their own good, but they're actually quite dumb. They just look at the battery and say what voltage you're at, and then they're told to do certain things. So if you connect this to a battery that's 12 volts, it'll look at it and say, oh, that battery's flat, I need to charge it. If I connect it to a battery at 10 volts, it'll look at it and say, oh, it needs to be rejuvenated. I'll do a pulse charge for ages and then charge it. So but if I throw all that bullshit in the bin, and I tell you that you need 3 stages to charge any lead acid battery. You only need 2 for a lithium, but 3 for a lead acid. Bulk is the full current from the charger. So basically, if you can imagine, we push current into a battery, start pushing amperage into it, and the voltage starts to come up. At a predetermined point in the bulk charge, the charger is told to halve its current. So it was here, push, voltage floats up, and then it drops. So the voltage drops with it. As soon as I halve the current, the voltage drops. It keeps pushing current, the voltage rises again until we get to what I call charged, which is our absorption voltage, usually 14.7 for an AGM. Then we turn the charger right down in amperage to 1 amp and right down in voltage to 13.6 volts. So that basically will drop that battery right down instantly into what we call float. Now you need to float a battery for about 4 to 5 hours for it to fill. Now that whole process puts a lot more energy back in the lead than we took out, but we have to do that to lead. We've got to soak that, get that chemical reaction back in and soak the lead to get it back to where we need to get it. Does all that make sense?
Yep.
7 and 8.
Just to let you know, I just stuffed 3 AGM batteries. And just what you said there is probably what I was doing wrong. I put them in, leave them for 2 or 3 hours. It comes up, goes equalise and then float. And as soon as I hit float, oh, that's fine, I'll get on to the next one.
Turn them off.
That was probably the wrong thing.
Yeah, and look, batteries, there's that old saying, batteries like to be worked. Batteries don't like sitting. If anybody's got NBN, I can guarantee you within probably the first 6 months, if you've got NBN to house, your battery's going to die and you're going to have NBN troubles because you're going to need batteries all the time because that little battery just sits with 13.4 volts on it constantly. If I hold lead with a voltage on it all the time, I actually grow sulfation. So you'll see maintenance charges, little tiny maintenance charges. Have I got a maintenance charger? And these have a maintenance mode. After about 5 days or 7 days, they turn off and then they just put a little spike, little blip, because a battery will self-discharge over time. If I put a full battery here on the bench and I check it in a month's time, the voltage will just slowly creep down. So that maintenance mode just pops it in. But even with a battery of mine in a battery box or something here in the shed, at least 2 or 3 times a year, I'll get the fridge, run it down right low and give it a good long charge. They like to have a cycle. Even a van in storage or a boat in storage, at least twice a year, give that battery a cycle. It'll love you. Yeah.
But Jason, could you just leave like a C-Tech or one of the Victrons or something like that just hooked up to your batteries all the time?
You can, but I still like to give them a cycle. Your C-Techs and Victrons all have a maintenance mode where they do that pulse mode. So they're not holding a voltage on the battery all the time. They turn off. And then about every hour they go blip, put a little bit of, and it helps to recover that self-discharge. So I still like to give batteries a bit of work. Otherwise they can get a bit that surface charge in them as well. I know guys that have had batteries in 4-wheel drives that have sat, and then they go into a big trip, and the fridge wouldn't run for the first day or two, but as the days went on and they used the battery, its capacity came back in, because it had developed a bit of a surface charge. So I always like to give them a good cycle before a big trip. Like if I'm doing a Simpson Desert run or something big, I'll always give my batteries even a couple of cycles, just to make sure they're at their best. So
with a battery charger, a 5 amp or a 15 amp, I mean you can get all sorts of ones. Can you put too much current in them?
Yeah. So there's a very old rule of thumb in the automotive and electrical trade that says 10%. So if it's a 100 amp battery, I need a 10 amp charger. But when I set about actually reading the user manuals for Full River and Ritter and bloody pretty much every battery I could find, the user manuals for those batteries all say 20%. So if it's a 100 amp battery, use a 20 amp charger. And that charge current is very important because it's sort of puts a little bit of pressure on that battery. And I always say it's a bad analogy and it's not how it works, but you're pushing the water out of that lead a little bit. But that charge current is critical. You don't put a 100 amp charger on a 100 amp battery because you can cook it. You can overpower that battery. And that chemical process, you got to understand it's a chemistry set. You got water breaking down into hydrogen, recombining in the top of the battery back into water, falling down, mixing with acid moving onto the lead sulfate happening, lead oxide moving, the P and the B move over. Then we go back up to, water again. It's actually a slow process. So the battery doesn't want to be smashed. Come on, hurry up, you bastard, just charge. Lithium, on the other hand, can take a much higher charge current and a lot of charge much quicker. So much so it's got to have that little fat controller on the top to say, hey, you chubby, slow down. You're getting too much. You can have a bit more. It just says, give it to me, baby. Take a lot. So that's one of the benefits of lithium. I would say on lithium, just be careful the lithium you buy. There is a bucket load of rubbish out there. I'm hearing stories where China are getting, like Nissan Leafs and hybrid cars and taking the battery packs apart, getting the good cells and making a 40 amp pack and putting it inside a battery that says 100 amp, and they're just crap. They're rubbish. They're batteries that have done 1 million cycles and they're putting them in a battery. They're not even the rated capacity. There's all sorts going on out there. So really got to do your research and try and, find some good brands. And it's that old saying, the poor pay twice.
And you pay for what you get. So if you had a 5 to 15 amp, because you look at all these bloody chargers and you could get seduced by saying, I need a 25, 30 amp charger, but really a 5 to 15 would be big enough.
Yeah, I personally, for round home now, that's a 12. It's probably a little bit light. But anything in the 12 to 15 amp for home is what I'd buy now. I used to buy 5 to 6, but that was obviously too low. So now I buy, that 12 to 15 amp for around home. This is my charger. I represent AusCharge here in Queensland, but I actually really, really rate these chargers. I've been selling these to Battery World now for probably 8 years, if not maybe longer. And you can count on one hand the amount of warranty claims that I get. It's a very, very good quality charger. People don't tend to rate it because it's got an AusCharge on it. Might sound a bit cheap, but these are really, really good. Really good.
Jason?
Yes, hello.
I've got a charger, which is a 20 amp charger. It's
Yes.
an automatic thing. It's got 3 stages.
Yes.
What you said was, if I've got a 120 amp hour battery, so that 20 amp charger would be good for that.
Yeah.
What about if I use that charger on a 33 ampere hour battery?
Be a bit heavy. If you can, one of the things I like about the AusCharge is down the bottom, and I'll try and hold this so you can see it, I can actually tell this battery with a selector to be 12 amps, 8 amps, or 1 amp. Okay, so I can actually I can tell this charger to be a smaller charger. So when I put it on my 30 amp, because I've got over the back here, I've got a little solar battery that powers, I've got a strip light here around my little desk, just so at night when I come in there's a light on, and I have a solar panel on the roof that runs on a timer and turns it on and off. And every now and then I give that battery a charge. I might have had bad solar or whatever. I'll just tell this to be smaller. So just be careful putting a 20 amp on a 30 amp would be too heavy.
Can I
Now,
ask you a question, Jason?
yes,
I've got a Xantrax. It's a Canadian thing, I think.
yeah, I know the Xantrax well.
You can charge 3 batteries at once. Is
Yes.
it best to charge 3 or just 1 at a time?
Okay, so basically with the Xantraxes, and it will depend on the model, but overwhelmingly with Xantrax, they have what they call a diode splitter internally. So if you can imagine, you go to Bunnings and you buy the hose fitting that screws on your tap, and you got 3 gates, 1, 2, 3. So it's got 1 in, 3 out. So if it's a 40 amp charger, and
Oh,
you
it's
put
20.
it's a 20.
20 up.
So if you got a 20 amp charger with 3 outlets, and if you plug 2 batteries on it, each battery will get 10 amps.
Oh, I
If you
see,
plug
yeah.
3 batteries on it, each battery will get, a third.
Ah,
So it doesn't go 20, 20, 20, and all of a sudden a 20 amp charger's now become a 60. It will, whatever you put on it, it will divide by the number. Does that make
so
sense?
charge one battery at one time.
Yeah, and it'll and what it won't do is it'll treat all of those batteries the same. So and that's fine, but every now and then, at least twice a year or even once a year, make sure you take each battery off and move it around in the pack. So move this battery over to here, move that battery to the middle, like you'd rotate tyres.
Yeah.
Rotate your batteries and give them each an individual charge and discharge. So run them all down, rotate them, and then just with a 12-volt charger, charge each one at least once or twice a year. And
I
again,
charge them every time I come back from.
yeah,
From it.
because what happens is you'll get
motor.
inevitably the one at the end's got a longer cable going to this one to that one. So every now and then swap them round.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, or try and get your cable lengths perfect if you can, but it's hard when you're charging 1 out of 3. But just keep that in mind. That's a very good thing to do. Just swap them. Even in 24-volt packs for you guys with trolling motors, swap the batteries around every 6 months. You'll be amazed how much longer you get out of your battery pack. Because 24-volt, one's copping a load all the time, that front battery's getting a charge and discharge. Just keep in mind that electrons flow from the negative to the positive, not from positive to negative. We've always been taught that electricity flows from the positive to negative, but it doesn't. The current flows from the negative. So it comes out of the battery via the negative. Just keep that in mind. So it's always good.
I always take my batteries out and take them up to the charger. I don't do it in my boat.
Yeah. No,
Yes,
fair.
another question for you.
Yes.
My battery charger has a temperature monitor,
Yes.
but I don't actually know how to use that really. Do you just put it next to the battery or do you just stick it into the...
I'm going to give you the answer to that right here. And I'm going to show you, can you see that clearly?
Yep.
In a 12-volt battery, in a 6-volt battery, there's no middle divider. So it's 2, 4, 6. In a 12-volt battery, you've got dividers inside the battery. So this cell here has got 2 sides for heat to dissipate. This cell has only got 1 side.
Yep.
So when we get up in bigger batteries, when we get up to 200 amps and above, they always say you can't buy a 400 amp 12-volt battery. They're either 6 volts or 2 volts. And that's because the heat generated in this battery can't escape through one side. So with a 6-volt, you've got 2 surfaces for the heat. So where I like to put my temperature sensors for batteries is right there. In the middle of the battery. Not on the top. You know why? Because in the top of a battery, there's a big air gap. I'm not measuring the temperature of the lead. I'm measuring the temperature of the plastic in the top of the battery. A lot of people will tell you to put it on the battery terminal. Now, if you've got a high current discharge battery, like a trolling motor at 30 amps, that terminal will get quite hot. It's got a lot of current coming out of it. Now, keep in mind Ohm's law. Ohm's law would dictate, well, you can do some simple maths. If I've got a 500 watt load, yeah, and I've got 13 volts in the battery, I divide the 13 into the 500. I don't know if anybody's got a calculator handy. What is that number? So 500 watts divided by 13 volts.
38.
38 amps is what I'm pulling out of that terminal. Now my battery's at 11 volts. What's 500 divided by 11?
A little bit more, yeah.
A lot more. So the lower my battery gets, the higher the amperage requirement of that battery.
35.
The hotter they get. So I always Sikaflex the temperature sensors there. That's just me, because this here is where the battery heat will be through the core of the battery. It'll get all hot through here. This is the one that is going to work the hardest, And this is the one that's going to have the heat come out the most. So that's the one I want to monitor. Up here, there's an air gap so that hydrogen can recombine into water and it rains down. I actually got a battery and cut the top off and got clear packaging tape strapped over it and then put a battery through full charge cycles. And I couldn't believe how much water rains down inside an AGM or gel battery. I was amazed. There's a lot of water combining in up there.